And welcome on in, everybody, to Thursday Night Live here on the Auburn Undercover podcast. We are live, technically. We are not live in person because, well, if you live in this part of the country, you can probably make a decent assumption why. It is very rainy outside, and the conditions here on Thursday evening could get pretty swampy. And so, in the interest of safety, we decided to just go from home today. Also, I'm not sure how not many of our fine folks at AU Club might be there right now. And so this is Thursday Night Live. I am Nathan King, joined here by Jason Caldwell, presented by the Auburn University Club. We will be excited to get back in there next week. We really enjoyed last week's show. Have had a really good time recording in there so far, and have enjoyed AU Club being our sponsors on this show. So far, it's been a great time. And so, Jason, we will first, before we get into football, I wanted to touch on some news in case people haven't seen it. What are we looking at? About an hour ago at this point. Auburn basketball 2025 commitment, a guy that you wrote all about, a guy that you know all about, has visited. Big time target for Auburn. Tell us a little bit about Simon Walker and what he brings to their 25 class. Oh, Jason, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry, buddy. Sorry about that. I think it's a really interesting guy to add for Auburn. Because a little different than guys they've recruited in the past. I mean, he's a really talented athlete and a guy that can do those things. But he is the consummate team guy. Doesn't have to shoot it a ton. He goes and rebounds. He plays defense. I talked to Coach Christian Sweeters today. Late last night, and he said, "Look, that guy doesn't get tired. He can run and run and run and never gets tired." He said that impacts him late in the game because he's fresh and it doesn't impact his jump shot. And I was thinking, man, sounds like a really good guy for Bruce Pearl to play 94 feet to do the things he does. He said, hey, he's actually on the front of our press. So this is a 6'5" guard. He's like probably a better passer than anything. And so I think about a guy that can facilitate, from the wing. If you had to, in a pinch, put him at point guard, he could do those things. But, I mean, he's long enough that he could probably play the three in some instances if you want to. So just I think a really interesting guy when you start thinking about pieces, building rosters, all those things. What have we talked about really in the past 12 months for basketball? It's teams that had these guys that stuck together and built it and did those are the teams that were really good. And I think this is a guy that you think about building for 4 or 5 years and at Auburn and being as his coach said, a glue guy. So I really like it. I think it's a really good addition.
Yeah, I mean, it's not apples to apples, very different, but, somebody like Dylan Cardwell, I mean, it's year 5 and Auburn is still reaping the benefits of having an extremely high-level backup center, a guy that they can count on in that kind of role. At the same time, Jason, you talked about some of these attributes Simon Walker brings to the table, and I would encourage everybody, read Jason's story, check out our national analysis on Walker. It's been great. A guy that, coming into Auburn and being developed, like he's going to shoot the ball. And I think he is a guy who could end up being a high-level player in Bruce Pearl's system for all those reasons you just mentioned, how well he might fit in here. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, 37% or so from three last year, 82% from the free throw line. The most interesting thing is that this guy started every game since he was a freshman at Huntsville High School in 7A. That shows you a lot, in my opinion, because when you're a freshman in 7A ball, you have to learn your role. He's continued that. He hasn't become a guy that said, hey, I need 25 shots a game. That's not who he is. Can he have some of those nights? He can, but he doesn't force the issue. And I think when you start thinking about the other guys that Auburn's recruiting, some of these top-level big guys, scorers, some of those things, I think having a guy that is, hey, he can score, but is willing to go, hey, let's get the ball to this guy. Let's get it to this guy. I like it. I think it's a really good pickup.
Yeah, we'll bounce around a little bit later. We will talk some basketball in this show because Wednesday was their first day of practice over at Neville Arena. It was also pro day. Jason and I were both on hand, talked to Bruce Pearl, and watched practice that day. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later, but wanted to get into football, of course. Talk about a big game coming up this weekend and the week that has been for Auburn against number 21 Oklahoma. The Sooners currently sit 2-point road favorite. It's a pretty good stat Patrick's got up there on our bottom line that OU is about an 83 winning percentage. True road games against unranked teams, so usually go take care of business. But Jason, there's a ton we could dive into here with this game. It's really intriguing on a bunch of levels. To me, starting with Oklahoma, they've had just as many offensive issues as Auburn, perhaps when you don't count the turnovers, even more. I mean, on paper, they
Oh,
are
yeah, absolutely
than Auburn's is. And they're going to be bringing in a true freshman quarterback into the Hornets' nest, guy who doesn't have a lot of his receivers right now. I think this is going to be a really big game for Auburn's defense, and I'm interested to see what it looks like against a kid who has little to no experience heading into this one.
Yeah, I think before we look forward, you have to look back for both teams. And last Saturday was kind of, I guess, a microcosm of both of the seasons for these teams so far. For Auburn, it was turnovers. You go back to Peyton Thorne, thought he played pretty well. It wasn't great, but I thought he played pretty well. He did, have a couple of touchdown drives, which was a big deal. It's turnovers. I mean, Auburn's defense on third downs, yeah, those guys have played well enough to win both the games they've lost. I think the defense has been solid. It's strictly turnovers for Auburn's offense, because when they don't turn it over, this is a team that has moved the football. They have moved it through the air. They have moved it on the ground. They have done those things. They've done things you need to be successful, but you can't be successful in turning the ball over. And so we had a question that kind of came through early on, was like, how do you fix it? I mean, that you continue to hammer it home, but I think the hard part of this one is you can't play scared. You just can't do it. You have to go play and trust what you've done, trust your preparation, those things. That's why I think that we'll see Peyton Thorne Saturday. I think the experience for him. But you look at it from Oklahoma, it was a microcosm of their season, because they had to go to a second quarterback, even though, they've got a guy that they thought was the answer, so much so that they sent Dylan Gabriel packing to Oregon and said, hey, this is our guy. And they've been pretty bad offensively. I mean, they averaged less than 300 yards a game total offense at Oklahoma. And they played Temple. They played Tulane, Houston, and then Tennessee last week. Tennessee defense pretty good. Tulane's been pretty good. But they have struggled in every facet of the game. And so the one place they haven't struggled is defensively. They're really good defensively. You're right. Bringing in a true freshman quarterback, first start on the road, really good defense. I won't be shocked to see Oklahoma try to slow this game down, run the quarterback, do some of those things, and try to keep him out of harm's way. I think we could see that, and I think this could be a much more low-scoring game than maybe people thought it might be coming into the season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this game has taken on, similar to the Arkansas game, it's taken on a little bit different of a life than we expected it to, going back just a few weeks. That's why you never know what to expect in a college football season. But yeah, Jason, I mean, this is Oklahoma's dead last in the Power 4 in yards per play.
That's great.
That is not very good at all. You look at that Tennessee game, excellent defense, one of the best, 2 or 3 units probably in the SEC there at Tennessee at the moment. But Jackson Arnold gets pulled there in the first half, and they go to Hawkins. I mean, you wrote a little bit today about kind of scouting him and going into this game. 4-star freshman. His dad was an NFL player, played at Oklahoma. Lots of talent, sort of a dynamic guy. It's not going to be, I don't think he's as much of a run around in the backfield as a guy like Taylon Green and Devin Dampier the past couple weeks. But it is another example of mobile, dynamic quarterback. And this Auburn defense is going to be tested. But at the same time, I mean, I'm interested to see what they scheme up, what that Oklahoma staff schemes up for him. Because clearly, whatever they've been running the first few weeks, I mean, you can't just plug him in there and expect him to succeed in a spot like this.
Yeah, no, I think you shorten it and try to, maybe some zone reads, some of those things. He does run it pretty well, but you're right. He's a different kind of guy. He can throw it, but you're right. They just haven't had a ton of production other than one receiver. Deion Burks, the Purdue transfer, has been their one receiver, and then a tight end that's done some good things, but they don't have a ton of production at wide receiver other than Deion Burks. And the guys, their top 3 leading receivers are all 5. 2 of them are 5'9", one's 5'8". So these are smaller, quicker guys. So that's an interesting dynamic to this one. But running back, one of their top running backs is questionable. They haven't run it very well. Jackson Arnold is tied for the team lead in rushing yards for Oklahoma. And so they haven't been extremely productive. Offensive line has had some movement, very similar to Auburn because of some injuries. May get a guy back this week, but I don't know that it's going to impact them a great deal. Their center is probably their best player, but 6'3", 291. I mean, it's not a big guy. Transferred from SMU and has some experience. So, Auburn has size up front in the middle. That could create some issues there and maybe plug a hole and get some penetration in the middle of that Oklahoma offensive line. There's so much unknown. I mean, we're 4 weeks into the season, and you look at both of these teams offensively, and you go, I don't really know what to expect. And so, can you find it? If you're Auburn, can you find it without turning it over? I think when you start looking at that, it's a very interesting game to see how this thing's going to turn out.
Yeah, and even, I mean, you look at what they've had at receiver in the passing game, obviously not working very well. Bauer Sharp, the tight end. Him and Deion Burks, nobody else has more than 100 receiving yards on the season for Oklahoma. But the story for them in that regard has been the receiving core and its injuries. You got 3 guys who are going to be out in this game, 3 of their best receivers. That's according to the SEC availability report. Jaden Gibson, Jaleel Farouk. Gibson is a guy that I don't think they expect back for quite some time. And then Nick Anderson, he was their guy. People remember maybe the Red River game last year, catches the game-winning touchdown. I think he had around 600 yards last season. He tried to give it a go against Tennessee.
Yeah.
Re-injured his leg. He is going to be out for this game. Deion Burks is questionable.
Yes.
For this game. And so, I mean, they've had to move Jacoby Johnson, who's a corner. They had to move him to receiver. He's a guy who played receiver in high school. They've moved him to receiver, and talking to Oklahoma people, he could if Burks can't go, he legitimately will play in this game. And so that's another big thing to point to is the injuries for Oklahoma.
It does. And that's what leads me to believe that it's going to be a little bit more closer to the vest, to where you're going, man, you had so many things happening at wide receiver, new quarterback, haven't run it well. Maybe you see 2 tight ends and say, hey, look, what we're going to do? We're just going to line up and try to run the football and try to shorten the game, not put our quarterback in harm's way, sprint him out, give him some short, easy throws. And we saw that in New Mexico. Sprint out in the flats, short throwing game. Don't hold the ball too long. I think that's what we will see out of Oklahoma's offense Saturday.
Yeah, and touching here, I'm looking at the SEC availability report on the Auburn side. Of course, we'll get an update here in about 47 minutes here at around 7 o'clock. The guys we know are going to be out, obviously. Champ Anthony, we can talk a little bit about that impact, but he is out, of course, with that leg injury. Brendan Frazier, we know about his foot injury. He's out. Tyler Scott's been out since the preseason. The only one that popped up to me yesterday that was a little bit surprising, you've got Alex McPherson is questionable. Too Tall Miller is questionable. That's kind of the same as last week. He was they go that whole game. Isaiah Rakes is questionable here as well. We saw last week they had a few questionable guys, and by the time it came around to Saturday, they bumped them right on.
Yeah, we saw Rakes this week coming through, and he was moving around okay, and so I'd be surprised if he's not able to go at least some on Saturday, and some of those guys that'll be, hey, how's it feel in warm ups, and the one to me is Too Tall. That kind of continues to bother you, and facing a really fast Oklahoma defense. They're not extremely big other than in the middle. They got 2 300-pounders in the middle of the defense, but defensive end wise, they're 250, a couple of guys that are 260. And then, linebacker is their best player at 6'4", 243. But they don't have a ton of size. This is a speed, fly to the football defense. And if you're a little hampered, that's probably not the best guys to go up against, kind of running off the edge. So that'll be an interesting one for me. We might see a little bit more of Ronan Chambers at right tackle on Saturday, with Auburn maybe saying, hey, well, let's run the football and see if we can get some things going there.
Yeah, I mean, it's on that side too. You've got Gentry Williams was expected to play a role for them at corner. He is out for this game. Kendall Dolby is their starting nickel. He is out for this game as well. You mentioned Danny Stutzman, though. I mean, that's
really good player.
The best you're going to see at linebacker in the country. Billy Bowman is a really, really talented safety there on the back end. Yeah, I mean, we haven't even touched much on the Oklahoma defense. That's for me, Jason, is like which element of this game is going to weigh heavier? Is it going to be a turnover-prone Auburn offense against an Oklahoma defense that I believe has
created a bunch?
They're high up in takeaways, or is it going to matter more that you've got a true freshman quarterback and an offense that's been very bad against a defense that's been pretty solid and probably would be even better if the offense wasn't turning the ball over. To me, it's which of those two things ends up, weighing more for the respective side, I think is probably going to be who ends up winning this game.
Yeah, no, Oklahoma is tied for the nation's lead in calls turnovers.
There you go.
Of course, like Cal is one behind at 11. A lot of those due to Auburn. And so, I think you look at it and it's which one of those things falters, because you would not expect Auburn's offense and Oklahoma's offense and freshman quarterback to both go out there and light it up. Which one of them can protect the football? That's going to be the thing, and that's the danger when you think about bringing in a true freshman quarterback. And Jackson Arnold doesn't have a ton of experience either. If he were to be playing, I mean, he's not a guy that's played in a ton of football either. So that's for Auburn. We talked about it last week. It's an every week occurrence, but it's even more important this week when you face an offense that is struggling, is that if you're Auburn, you make them one-dimensional. Their wide receivers are banged up. Put them in third and long situations with young quarterback and say, all right, we're going to give you a bunch of different looks. Maybe you blitz at times. Maybe you back off at times. Try to confuse them as much as possible. I mean, to me, that's the advantage with the noise that Auburn has on Saturday afternoon.
We've talked a lot about Oklahoma here on both sides of the ball. Auburn, like we talked about, I think you and I both agree that feel like it'll be Peyton Thorne in this game. Could be very wrong, depending on how the week went at practice. Of course, they did split reps at practice, but Jason, I think it's almost more frustrating for Auburn right now, the fact that, and I'm not saying they haven't been beaten straight up in these games. It's not like they've played, like a title contender outside of the turnovers, but I feel like it's almost even more frustrating for Hugh Freeze and the staff to have just felt like you gave these games away. I mean, you and I talked about that in the post-game podcast after Arkansas, but I mean, really, Jason, it comes down to, and I think you brought up a great point. I was talking to somebody about this today. This is a game, there's a lot of pressure. Your back is against the wall. You want to be the one that's taking advantage of the crowd, going out there and kind of getting off the schneid here. It will be interesting game planning and play calling. Like, I mean, you don't want to play tight here. You want to be the one who's loose in front of your home crowd. I'll be really interested to see how they balance that.
Yeah, and this is one of the times when it's almost a detriment when you play so many home games in a row. Sometimes it's good to go and rally the troops and to feel like everybody's against us. There's no pressure to go on the road and play. Sometimes that's a good thing. And you're right. It feels like right now that the weight of the world is on the offense to go out there and not turn it over. And that's what I was talking about. How do you balance not turning it over with going out and still making plays? We saw it last week. And that's why I think Peyton Thorne a little bit, the older guy, experienced, he's seen the ups and downs. He's able to bounce back and go. I think it's harder for a young guy when you don't have, you haven't had success. If you struggle early, I think it's a lot harder for a guy who's never been that situation before. Everybody has struggled at some point. The more you play, the more of those you have. And so that coupled with the fact that Peyton Thorne is just a better runner, and you're going to need every yard you can get against a team like this. The 3rd and 4 run for 5 yards is going to be massively important Saturday. Can you get, instead of taking a sack on 2nd and 8, if you pick up 3 yards and give yourself a 3rd and manageable? I think that's where Peyton Thorne gives you the edge. He's, like I said, if all things are equal, then you go with a guy that can do more. And I don't think it's equal. I think the experience factor still weighs heavily towards Peyton Thorne. And so I think, that's who we'll see. But you don't know. Maybe we'll both be surprised when it's 15 that rolls out there on Saturday.
Yeah, maybe he's been dynamite in practice. They've both had those opportunities this week. Hugh Freeze talked a lot about, the mental side of that. I thought his comments on Wednesday were really good, about focusing this week in meetings and film preparation. Like, what are you good at? Focus on that, get comfortable with that, get confident in that, and then saying, do this. And then if we can just cut out a couple more things, you guys will be in a much better spot at the quarterback position. Yeah, we're getting a lot of comments on both Facebook and YouTube of running the football. And that was something Hugh Freeze talked about on Monday. He said they have to start winning first down. He felt like, though, and you and I talked about this a little bit, like he felt like they are actually doing that to a decent amount. But Hugh Freeze's words were, when they got out of that RPO stuff and decided to call something different, maybe on second down, all of a sudden they're in third and long, or call something different on first down, all of a sudden you're in a second and long still. And so, Jarquez Hunter and Damari Alston and Peyton Thorne, because that RPO element with him is going to be really important. That is going to be crucial for them in this game. When they've held on to the ball, because the running backs are not without blame this season. I think we totaled 5 fumbles for Jarquez and Damari in 4 games is not great. But when they've held on to it, they've been pretty. I think they're a top 30 yards per carry against Power 5 teams in those 2 games, and so that's pretty decent. At the same time, as everything else, it seems like in this game, there is another side of that coin, and that is that Oklahoma has the number 7 run defense in the country, and so that something's got to give there.
It does. I mean, and then you think about who you've played. Houston's not a team that's going to run it a ton. Tulane's not a team that's going to run it a ton, but their yards per carry is not very good. Tennessee ran the ball pretty well, and it was really interesting because I thought Tennessee, Josh Heupel did a great job last week of knowing game situation and going, look, we got enough points to win this game because Oklahoma's not going to score. Let's just run the ball. And they started running clock, and that's not normal for them. But you look at Auburn, and one of the things is that, like, you've got to have the ball to run it. And that's a big part of this thing. Auburn's run 230 plays in 4 games, which is 98th nationally. That's not ideal. That's not how you're looking to use this. And people talked about carries. I mean, there's not a ton of carries to be had. And here's the other side. People talked about Michigan. Like, God, just do what Michigan did. Well, Auburn can't do what Michigan did because they haven't recruited offensive linemen until the last 2 years. You still don't have those guys that you're rolling in there that are a bunch of high school All-Americans. Can you run it and be successful? Yes. But you can't run it and be successful against 7 and 8 man boxes all day long. Auburn's not capable of doing that. Michigan could do it last week against USC. You're still going to have to play a numbers game. And if the numbers dictate that there's 5 in the box, then you'll run the football and you'll have some success and you'll do those things. My guess is that Oklahoma, once again, is going to go, we're not going to give you those numbers very much. We're going to make you win one-on-one battles outside at wide receiver. And we're going to put 6 or 7 guys up there and make you win outside. And that's what teams have done. Can you make the correct decisions and deliver the football in the right spot? Can the receivers be in the right places and catch it when it's thrown to them? And, there's a lot of things that go into it. I think Auburn will run it more, but I don't think, people are thinking like, let's go run it 52 times. I don't think that's going to happen with this team, because if you run it 52 times, well, you're not going to be able to run it 52 times because you're not going to be able to convert enough third downs, in my opinion, to be able to do those things. If you can, and Auburn comes out and runs it, and no matter how many guys Oklahoma has a line of scrimmage, they're running the ball well, then I like Auburn's chances Saturday a whole lot.
Yeah, they'll win by 2 touchdowns if they're doing that, because like you said, they'll be able to play ball control like somebody like Tennessee. I mean, that kind of goes back to the reasoning for Thorne in this game, is making those decisions, making sure you're making the right decisions, and kind of just that, like we talked about earlier, it's do or die for this offense now. This is a guy who's worked with these starters since this. I mean, he's been the fixture at first team quarterback since the spring. Again, we could be completely wrong here. You mentioned holding on to the football. Freeze admitted this week that Cam Coleman, it's been bothering him. Had that shoulder injury late against Missouri there in week 2. Didn't play the following week. It was almost like the same exact play, just one of those shallow routes, and the ball just went off his hands. And me and Christian were talking after the game. It's just like the extension of it is almost just awkward. And I think that comes with the shoulder issue. And so, but as Freeze brought up, and I'm saying this because I think Auburn's 5-star Megatron receiver is important to get healthy and to get confident. As Freeze said, like, it was the injury, and then it was also when he was in a non-contact jersey, he wasn't getting the normal practice reps that he had. That's important for a guy who just turned 18 years old. And so that's I'm not saying he's going to have a breakout game, but for me, I'm interested to see number 8 in this game, because when it's do or die for the offense, you need your best player to step up, and he's definitely one of those.
Yeah, and Keandre Lambert-Smith has been the guy that was as advertised. We were told, hey, we think this guy's an NFL wide receiver, and he has shown that. He has been steady. He's been big play. He's made the tough catch. He's done all those things that you want. Now it's time for the rest of the group, and I mean, Cam's one of those guys. Obviously, I think we've seen flashes of it when healthy. Got the ball early last week, and there's obviously that was a plan to get him a touch early on. Continue to see more of Malcolm Simmons, I think, as you continue to move forward. And this could be a week too where you use his speed to maybe hold a safety, hold a linebacker. We've seen him when he's in the game and when he's in motion usually get the football. This could be a week where you use that as hey, we want to get that linebacker 2 steps away with him in mind, or vice versa. So I think those are things to watch. But yeah, Cam, get involved, and then I still think there's going to be a time, and he's got to play better too. But Rivaldo Fairweather is still a threat for this team. I think getting him more involved would help everything about this offense. Now he's got to make some catches, and he's got to make a tougher catch. He's had some balls that he could have caught and should have caught this year. I still think he's the guy that could be the key for this whole thing for the offense, because you start running the tight end down the middle of the field, and all of a sudden linebackers have to drop a little bit. The safeties can't come up and add an extra guy in the box. And so there's pieces. That's the thing about this. There's people that are acting like this is 2012 Auburn offense, and it's not. These guys have made plays. They just turned the ball over a bunch, but they're the production and potential and playmaking ability is there for this offense, and it's shown up. It has to show up more consistently, and you do that. And as I've said, and I'll keep saying that this team can compete with anybody on the schedule if they don't turn it over. Now, that's the big question. Can you go out there and do that on Saturday?
Yep, and you need one of these. You need this game to be, this isn't Georgia and Alabama, but this is a ranked team. You need this game to be one where you have that home momentum, and you just feel like you can compete. Like you said, this team has the talent now, and they have the players now to be able to compete with anybody on the schedule.
It'd be nice to get off to a start to where you felt like, hey, this is the way it's supposed to go. Instead of turnover, you look up, you're down 7-0, and then it's an uphill battle the whole time. That's what both of those games felt like. Get off to a good start, build some momentum, and put the other team on their heels. That's how you go out and win home games, win any game for that matter. But when you have the crowd on your side, that's how you go out and do it is by getting off to a good start.
Yeah, the crowd has been, saw some people, people kind of complaining a little bit about it. It's
phenomenal.
But when, like you said, when you're down 7-0 in a couple games, or whatever it was against Cal, and you already have 2 turnovers 2 minutes into the second quarter, it's difficult. There's a reason those plays are deflating, because they're deflated. I think the student section has been the same.
Stayed there. Had some rain last time out a couple weeks ago that impacted it some, but for the most part, they've been there. They've shown up. They've cheered, and so I expect nothing less Saturday. I think it's going to be great. Oklahoma coming to Jordan-Hare Stadium for the first time. We've talked about it's opportunity Saturday. Here's your opportunity if you're Auburn. It won't salvage what's happened the first 5 games.
Right.
But, boy, it sure does change things if you can go out and win Saturday as you get prepared to go on the road.
And from there's a lot of football, but, zoomed out perspective, you lose this game, winning out at home won't even do it to get you to a bowl. So, it's from a macro perspective, not that you want to have that in week 5, but, and frankly, no one in that building is caring about that right now, but it's important. Yeah, it's important you can go to a bowl in year 2.
Yeah. You're all you're thinking about is the next game up. But if you're looking at the overall scope of a season, then you can't be 2-3 at home in your first 5 games and expect to have a season like you hoped you had. That's what makes this one. There's no such thing as a must win in game 5, especially the way you've had it. But this becomes a really important game Saturday.
Yep, for sure. Auburn and Oklahoma. This was billed as the biggest home game of the season in the offseason, and I think for all the reasons we just touched on.
It still is for different reasons.
It still is. Yeah, it still is for different reasons, and we'll see what happens in November when they bring somebody like Texas A&M in here. But this is a massive one, and it's a ranked team coming in despite Oklahoma's struggles of late. And so, Jason, before we bring in Christian here in a few minutes and talk recruiting, as I mentioned at the beginning, basketball practice got rolling. The preseason for Auburn officially tipped off on Wednesday inside of Neville Arena. Bruce does this every preseason where he talks about how much better it is, the fact that he's not feeling like he's seeing this team for the first time here in late September. They have those summer practices, a certain amount of hours they're allotted to be with the team. Of course, you have the summer workouts. The coaches are, involved there. They're around the team. And so this is their first time at preseason practice. It's not their first time at practice, period, in the entire offseason. But we got a good look at this team. They're in a scrimmage setting. They had pro day, so 27 NBA scouts from 24 different teams there. And some interesting comments from Bruce Pearl. A couple positional things I kind of wanted to touch on. Something you and I have talked about many times, the potential for Janai Broome to play that 4 spot. What does that look like? This is the most Bruce has ever talked about it and the most adamant he has been that they are going to do it. But at the same time, he kind of couched it and said, it depends on what the other guys look like over the next month. Could he start at the 4? Absolutely. It depends on if you can find somebody like Dylan Cardwell, somebody that you trust in that first rotation at the 5.
Yeah, I think it strictly depends on Dylan Cardwell and Chaney Johnson. It almost reminds me of the offensive line group where you're looking for your best 5, and you're going like, who do we need to move to get to our best 5? I think it comes down to which one of those guys do you feel like makes your best 5? Is it Dylan Cardwell or is it Chaney Johnson? And then you go, okay, well, if it's Chaney, then you go, okay, well, then, Broome starts. But if you feel like Dylan is a better fit for what you want to do and play better, then I think Broome slides to the 4 and becomes a starter. I think Chaney is one of the keys to this team, him and G. Mutz and Turtle. What can you get from those guys? And you don't have to have Jalen Williams numbers, but can you get 10 and 8 a night combined? Because this team's going to have the other parts, I believe. I'm anxious to see kind of what those guys can do.
Yep. Chaney is a guy that I think some Auburn fans may be putting a little bit too much in terms of him replacing Jalen Williams. That doesn't have to be a 1-to-1. He's just as efficient and explosive and athletic as him. He's explosive and athletic as just about anybody. Chaney Johnson,
different kind of guy,
a different player. And as we were talking about yesterday, we're watching practice. Like if he does end up starting at the 4, people saying, "Oh, he doesn't. He's not as good as the rest of the starters." That's I think what some people have been saying, and it's like if Chaney Johnson is your worst starter, you're in a. Nobody in college basketball has 5 superstars in their starting lineup except for UConn. Like this just doesn't happen. It's just all for Bruce. It's all about how it works in the system.
Correct, and like we were talking about is like this is a different type of team because you've added scores on the perimeter for this team. Obviously, Denver's already a scorer. JP Pegues is a guy that can score. I don't think he'll be called on to do a ton of that, but Miles Kelly is going to be a scorer for this team. Chad Baker-Mazara, another one of those guys that I think is going to be a scorer for this team in that mid-range game. And, he's improved his outside shooting, but Denver and Miles Kelly can shoot the basketball. And interesting to see how much those guys can be on the court maybe together, because another one of those things we learned yesterday, Nathan, is that Denver Jones is going to see more time at the point, and Tahad Pettiford can play both spots. That's a lot of built-in rotations for 3 or 4 guys for 2 positions.
Yeah, at the moment, it doesn't matter that much what your starting group looks like at the 2 and the 3. At the 1, JP Pegues, like you bring him in to be that guy. He's the most steady veteran point guard they've had in a few years, and so you brought him in to do that. But you're afforded that luxury now, especially with as you alluded to, Bruce was preaching since March. I don't want to shoehorn Tahad Pettiford as a point guard. It's a big responsibility in my offense. I think he's way too explosive of a scorer and way too good of a scorer. I don't want him to try to handle that load. He changed his tune a little bit yesterday. He said, I have seen him in the summer be able to handle that. And then the scrimmage, and we saw him running point a lot for them. And so it gives you options now. At the end of the day, like we were talking about, like it doesn't necessarily matter who's doing what between the 1, 2, and the 3, other than Pegues probably at point guard. But man, you've got a lot of flexibility now, especially if somebody like Denver can give you some minutes at the 1 as well.
Yeah, and I think it creates some issues for opponents when you can have, those guys on the court maybe together, and a possession, one's at the point, one's at the two, and the next possession you come down and you're rotating, and one guy's at the point, and you're. I think that can create some issues for this team. And so, what's the rotation look like? Those are things that are always important for a Bruce Pearl team, because he again said, "Look, we want to play 10 guys. That's who they are." 27, 28 minutes, I would think, would be Janai Broome and probably Chad Baker-Mazara, maybe Denver. And then you think about how do the other minutes fill out for this team. But it's an interesting team. I like the makeup of this team, but what do the guards do? That's going to be a huge key, because you know what Broome is, you know what Dylan Cardwell can do. Chaney and I think those guys are going to be solid. If those guards can deliver that punch and that scoring punch, then all of a sudden this becomes a team that is much more prolific than even last year's roster was, because of that outside shooting.
Yeah, there's a lot to look forward to right away. The second game, they'll be going to Houston. It's a neutral siter. Sometimes they in the recent seasons, when you look at resumes, sometimes the NCAA just says nah, and they just count it as a true road game.
Yeah, I think that's what that would happen.
Because I think Alabama played Gonzaga in Seattle, and it was technically a neutral siter. And then when it came down to it, and you looked at their team sheet, they were like, "No, that's a road game." Like, sorry, we're going to count that as a road game.
I would say that playing Houston anywhere within the city limits would qualify as a road game.
Yeah, so technically neutral, but that it's going to be huge for them going on the road against 3 or 4 best programs in the country over the last few years. Be exciting, and so we'll be at practice, next couple weeks, and continue to bring you guys updates on that. I'm going to tap in Christian here and go to our three-man front, and look at some questions on the board. I think is what we wanted to do here next. There's one here, and Jason, I'll toss these to you, and then we'll get into recruiting. Local Auburn asks, what do you think Freeze is going to do to fix the interception issues? And what do you think he should do to fix the interception issues? And then we talked a little bit about it. He said, how many carries will Jarquez Hunter get?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think when you look at it, we talked about it. If you are what you are, then you have to figure out, and I asked this question last week, how do you balance being who you are offensively versus the turnovers in those situations? And so I think some of it comes down to maybe limiting some of the choices for quarterbacks, and they're still going to do the RPO thing, but maybe you cut it down to a couple of things. And obviously running the football is important, but those guys have to hold on to the football too. They've had way too many fumbles for the amount of carries that they've had, and so that's an issue as well for this team. But yeah, I think it comes down to, hey, here's what we're doing. Limit some of the things, and we talked about earlier, cutting it down. I think you cut it down a little bit more and say, look, we're going to simplify this a little bit more. And I do think, though, that one of the big keys for this one is can Peyton Thorne or whoever it is, can you take the 6-yard, 8-yard passes and try to, okay, when there's nothing open, dump it down, take those things, and can your receivers settle down in the zone if that's what it is? Those are keys to me to watching an offense grow and not turn it over as much.
Another one here from Smitty for AU asks, we didn't really touch on this. Hugh Freeze catching a lot of heat this week. Is it warranted in your opinion? It's been a tough week from that perspective, but there's lots of different facets to this, I think, Jason.
Yeah. First of all, I probably wouldn't have said it, but I don't disagree with Hugh Freeze that Auburn wins 9 out of 10 times against Arkansas. Turn it over 5 times. I'm right there with him. So I don't think that's one. The other part of this one is that we've talked about this, and turnovers are an issue. There's no question about that. But this is still a roster that, other than Keandre Lambert-Smith, Jeremiah Wright, maybe Dylan Wade, some of those guys, the most talented guys on this roster are your true sophomores, redshirt freshmen, and true freshmen. That's the guys that will be the NFL guys moving forward. For the most part, when you're looking at guys that go into portal, there's a reason why guys go into portal if they're 4th and 5th year guys, because they're not going to the NFL. And so you're taking guys, and they had to take them. Christian, we've been watching this closely for the last few years. When you don't recruit well on the line of scrimmage, you have to fend for yourself this way, and they had no choice to do that. You can lessen it every year, but they've had to do this. Do they need to show improvement? Absolutely, but make no mistake, this was a roster that was pretty decimated, and we're still seeing the effects of that.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line is still, I mean, you look at it, it's piecemealed together. You look at left tackle, a late transfer addition, a guy that, I think Hugh even talked about it before the Arkansas game. They wanted a guy like Fernando Carmona who went to Arkansas and they weren't able to get him on campus. And then Percy's a guy that you end up getting later on. Dylan Wade transfers in from Tulsa. Connor Lew is a guy that they scrambled to get as soon as they were hired and they were able to pull off. Jeremiah Wright has been a staple of this team forever now. And he's still here. But then your right tackle's a JUCO guy that came over and either was committed to Ole Miss or was probably going to go to Ole Miss with Jake Thornton.
Yeah, Jake Thornton had him committed. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. And it's do you need to get better? Yes. But was this a quick fix? No, it wasn't.
Well, and you look at it too, and Nathan, we'll get to the next question as well, but some of the best pieces that they have are those younger guys. I mean, Connor Lew, true sophomore. DeAndre Carter is a guy that they really believe in. He's already played in a couple of games as a true freshman after getting there in the summer. And that's just on the offensive line. Yeah, defensive line-wise, Malik Blockton has been one of your more productive interior guys.
Keldrick Falks may have been your best player. Well, he has been your best player on defense.
Yeah.
If you look at those guys outside, Kay and Lee.
Yeah.
Jay Crawford as a true freshman, Sylvester Smith, Caleb Harris. I mean, it's a bunch of young guys. Older guys are playing, but the guys that you look at and go, man, those guys are flashing. It's a lot of really young guys. And so, yeah, you gotta find a way to win. And I think if you don't turn it over, you do that. But yeah, the heat, I think, is to use the word, and I know people, there is heat, but to think that something could happen is utterly ridiculous.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
That's
would have to be would have to be some sort of disaster that is not even aligned with losing and winning football games, type of thing. Especially because, as we'll get to now, they still have a top 5 recruiting class in the next 2 classes, and that tends to matter when you're looking at a rebuild. Christian, rope you in here to kind of close us out with some recruiting topics. AU Champs asks, how many games can we lose and still maintain a top 10 class? We just sort of touched on it, probably a lot. Obviously, that's not what Auburn wants to do, but just your thoughts, Christian, on people getting a little squirrely about the potential for this class as Auburn's lost a couple games.
Yeah, I mean, there's no perfect science here. I think if Auburn gets to 6-6, I think you're definitely top 10. I think if Auburn goes 5-7, you're probably top 10. You're probably somewhere in that 5 to 10 range still, because it probably projects as a bigger class as well. I mean, you look at it, and I think they're at 24 total commitments right now, if I remember correctly. You're still going to get a quarterback of some sort, most likely, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. Still searching for another running back, although you kind of took a little bit of a ding here on Thursday as Usman Kroma delayed his decision a week. Still probably going to get a receiver or two. One guy who will be in this weekend we think could be in the class, Sam Turner. You're done at tight end. Still searching for O-line. Think you're in a good spot with Nelson McGuire. Searching for as many D linemen as they can get. Maybe another linebacker. Still loading up at corner. So you can still add.
Yeah, it could be 30.
Yeah, you could still very easily end up at 30 guys, which I don't know. I mean, obviously it'll depend on what other schools do and how many they take as well. But if you end up with a bigger class, maybe just by numbers alone, you could get there. But it's not just numbers. I mean, it's a talented group. Even a guy like Bryce Diaz, who came in the summer and is a little bit lower ranked and camped, he's gotten off to an incredible start to his senior season. And so I would say 6-6 probably gets you top 10 for sure. 5-7, you're probably hovering. Maybe you're a little closer to the 8 to 10 range, where if you're 6-6, you could still be pushing for a top 5 class.
Yeah, and it's an all individual case by case basis, and it's not a blanket on what impacts a class. It's more about what impacts each player individually. And so I think if you go out and show improvement, compete, and you're winning games, or you're playing guys toe to toe, and they go, man, that team right there is really close. Then you've shown them exactly what you told them, which is, hey, we're close, but we need you to help us out. So it all depends on what the individual thinks.
and we'll probably find out how good of a staff they are at recruiting. I mean, we already think they're a good recruiting staff, but right now it kind of feels like you're trending in a similar situation to Billy Napier in terms of recruiting, where you recruited really well, regress a little bit in year 2, and then it was Auburn that was plucking away from Florida's class. Will other schools be able to pluck away from Auburn's class here as they struggle a little bit in year 2 compared to what they thought they might be? We don't have the answer to that yet, but we'll kind of see what happens there.
Yep. And as we get down here toward 45 minutes, I wanted to just kind of touch on real quick something people probably want to talk about. Christian, I told you I would ask you about it, unfortunately. The quarterback question is something I know you guys are ready to see resolved this weekend, potentially. Christian, I guess just talk about Deuce Knight, the Deuce Knight dilemma, I guess we'll call it, and because you had a little bit of an update in your big board today.
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it, the dilemma. That's kind of what Auburn is in. And, you said we'll have a resolution, or I don't remember how you just phrased it. But we will know one way or the other, in my opinion, on what happens with Auburn and Deuce Knight when this weekend is over. That might not mean we know what Auburn will have at quarterback in the 2025 class. But I think if it gets through this weekend, Jason, and Deuce Knight doesn't do something, I mean, Auburn has already started to talk with some other quarterbacks a little bit more than they were previously, even like a month ago. A guy like Julian Lewis, the contact is picked up there again a little bit. You don't want recruiting it's a balance. You have to be careful. You don't want to push guys super hard, and you've done that with Deuce Knight to this point. You thought you were at the finish line. You thought you were past the finish line. You thought you had him locked up the Alabama A&M weekend with plans to do something for the Cal weekend. He doesn't do that. You maybe play things patient a little bit, give him a little bit more space, give him a little more time, let him come on a couple more visits for some games. Now you've got to know. You don't want to push guys, but now you're at the point where you've got to know one way or the other. Are you in? Are you out? Because if you're out, we're out too, and we're going after some other guys.
Yeah, I think if you're Notre Dame, it's the same thing. Sooner or later, you go, hey, we have to know something, because, I mean, yes, it's still the end of September, but this is not 1988 to where you're waiting to February. I mean, early December comes pretty quickly in the recruiting world nowadays, and so you have to know who it is and where you're going if it's not him. And so I agree. It feels like the next 5 or 6 days, probably before next weekend, I think there'll be some resolution. I agree, and we'll see what happens. It's going to be an important weekend, like you said. He knows everything about Auburn. He's been on campus a ton already this month. There's nothing more to see for him other than, do I believe in what they're doing, or am I going to Notre Dame? That's the only question he can answer, and I think that question has to come pretty quickly.
Yep. And you can't string it out too long. Like Christian was saying, you don't want to jeopardize. You never know what's coming in the next couple months. You never know what you're going to have to put your time and effort and your hours toward. And so you definitely don't want to be strung out on a guy that eventually leaves you out in the dark.
That's why I think you know one way or the other. So, hey, we're done. You're done. One way or the other.
And the other thing real quick as well is, if you want to maintain this class that you have, if you want to keep pushing to be top 10, top 5, quarterback is a key piece of that. And you need that guy.
Yep.
Yeah. It seems like they pretty much got everybody else other than him. A couple pieces here and there.
Anyway, so that's for sure.
Yeah.
A pretty high percentage. That is going to do it tonight for Thursday Night Live, the Zoom edition, we'll call it, here from home. We appreciate AU Club. As always, we are very, very excited to get back there next week. And
for our first road trip show next week. So that'll be interesting.
Yes, absolutely. We'll be in there. We'll be in there next week. And so everybody stay safe wherever you are watching from tonight. We're going to get hit a little bit. Hopefully it's not too bad here, but wherever you are, stay safe with the hurricane over the next 24, 48 hours. And for Jason Caldwell and Christian Clemente, as soon as I find this little outro video that Patrick so nicely made for us, we will catch you guys later.